Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's installment of the fall seminar series hosted by the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Center for Hellenic Studies here at Simon Fraser University. My name is Dimitris Krallis, and I'm the director of the center, who will be responsible for moderating today's talk. Each year, we invite scholars working in different aspects of Hellenic studies to present their research on a wide range of topics in the fields of archaeology, classics, Byzantine, Ottoman, modern Greek history, as well as literary and cultural studies. Our talk today is very much within this very framework. Before I begin, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that this event is taking place at SFU's campus on Burnaby, on unceded traditional territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Coquitlam peoples. A bit of housekeeping. Before I introduce today's speaker, I would like to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded. If you have any questions or concerns about SFU's Zoom privacy and security guidelines, I would ask you to visit the SFU IT services website. Regarding our online audience, if we run into any technical problems, we will update you in the chat function. But please, if the problems are persisting, do note that the event is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel at a later date, so you'll have a chance to follow it. And without further ado, I'm pleased to present today's speaker, our own Hellenisms past and present, local and global postdoctoral fellow, Dr. Aytek Alpan. He comes to us from the University of California, San Diego, the history department there, and is a historian whose research examines ethnic and linguistic minorities in the transition from empire to nation state, forced displacement, and the formation of refugee identity, agency, and memory subsequent to involuntary population movements, the euphemistically called exchanges of population. His research concentrates primarily on modern Greece and Turkey, particularly on the experience of the 1923 Greco-Turkish population exchange, on which we will learn more about today. His book project, entitled Trajectories of Displacement, a comparative historical analysis of the 1923 Greco-Turkish population exchange, offers a broad and long-term analysis of the Greco-Turkish population exchange with an emphasis on the refugee experience. But beyond that, I'll let him to introduce today's talk.
Thank you, Dimitri, for the introduction. And thanks for coming. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Center for Hellenic Studies at Simon Fraser University for supporting my ongoing research project and for giving me this opportunity to be a part of this talk series. And without further ado, I would like to start with my presentation outline. So I'm going to start with some clarifications on the terminology I am going to use. And then I will pull the curtain a little bit back to offer some background information regarding the 1923 population exchange between Greece and Turkey, for those who are not familiar with the subject. And then we will explore the subject of the refugee press in Greece with a particular emphasis on a newspaper known as Προσφυγική Φωνή. So let me start with the terminology. I think it's important to mention right away that neither Karamanlides nor Karamanlidika is a concept I endorse or employ in my studies. I employ them occasionally only as a shorthand to call these phenomena with my reservations. I perceive the designation Karamanli, Karamanlidika, Karamanlides to be a misnomer. I identify three primary problems regarding the designation of the Turkish-speaking Orthodox Greeks as Karamanlides. First of all, I have my historical and geographical reasons. And then I find this, and those people also found these concepts pejorative and discriminatory, and they never used these terms as a self-designation. So to begin with, this is a misnomer. Karamanlides is a misnomer when we consider geography and history. Turkish-speaking Greeks were not restricted to the ill-defined territory known as Karaman. There were Turcophone Greek settlements on the Black Sea coast, as well as in the Aegean and Marmara regions. As a result, this community and phenomenon spread beyond the confines of Central Anatolia and even the Ottoman Empire. According to the calculations of Kitromilides and Alexandris, in Pontus, for example, Turkish-speaking Greek settlements accounted for 25% of the known language demographics. In Bithynia, this ratio exceeded 20%. These ratios hold significant importance and cannot be regarded as negligible. In Cappadocia, this ratio was, of course, higher. It was almost 60%. As a result, naming these people Karamanlı and the way they speak Karamanlidika gives a false impression about the historical geography of this phenomenon. If you were to construct a geographical definition, Karamanlidika and Karamanlides, particularly in the second half of the 19th century, were truly an Istanbul-centric phenomenon. I think maybe next semester we can talk about this at length. So these terms were considered pejorative and discriminatory by the Turkish-speaking Greek community in the Ottoman Empire. For example, in the introduction of his 1885 book, Nea Methodos, yani usulü cedid, yani Ellinika lisanını yazmak, anlamak ve söylemek için usul, new methods, i.e. method for writing, understanding, and speaking the Ellinika language, Elias Emanuelidis says, since not knowing the Ellinika language is considered a deficiency and a defect, the use of the word Karamanlı has become a fashion in every corner of Istanbul. And anyone who does not speak Greek is required to tolerate this derogatory fashion. Perish the thought. We do not recognize the nickname Karamanlys that has been applied to us in a derogatory manner. The people of Anatolia ahalisi, they do not deserve such sarcasm. Ioannis Anastasiadis, a Turcophone Greek from Fertek, Nida, claims in his handwritten memoirs donated to the Center for Asia Minor Studies that the word Karamanlı derives from the phrase Kara imanlı, which means in Turkish, someone practicing black faith. Hence, the community itself deemed this designation objectionable and refrained from its usage. What was the self-designation they used? They called themselves Anatolians, Anadolular, Anadolu karındaşlar, Anatolian brothers, Anadolu vatandaşlar, Anatolian compatriots, Orthodox hemşeriler, fellow Orthodox countrymen. Furthermore, it might be argued that Karamanlidika too appears to be a misnomer when examined via a linguistic lens, but I will leave this aside too. Hopefully we can talk about this next semester when we talk about Karamanlidika. Another issue that requires clarification and some background information is the subject of population exchange. Population exchange emerged as a part of an extensive repertoire of state strategies to construct ethnically homogeneous nations. These repertoire comprise boundary alterations, voluntary or involuntary assimilation policies, demographic engineering methods such as ethnic dilution, ethnic consolidation, or ethnic cleansing, and genocide as an ultimate solution to the question of minorities. The idea of exchanging minorities, making ethnic adjustments, unmixings, disentangling populations in the Balkans gained currency one more time when the Great War ended, and the international community became preoccupied with the pursuit of a solution to the Eastern question and the problem of the displaced masses throughout Europe. So population exchange was advertised as a necessary measure for protecting minorities in the Balkans. One of the first issues to be settled in the Lausanne peace negotiations, actually the first one, was the population exchange, because the coexistence of different ethnicities within a nation state was considered unnatural, and this abnormal state had to be dealt with through unmixing populations. It should always be kept in mind that in 1923, the population exchange was offered as the de jure solution to the refugee issue in Greece, which had been an ongoing problem since 1914 and was intensified with the collapse of the Greek front in Anatolia in 1922. We're talking about a fait accompli. Fait accompli. At the time of the peace negotiations, almost 1 million Greeks had already migrated to Greece from Asia Minor, Pontus, and Thrace. The Greek refugees were one of the earliest manifestations of the refugee problem that the international community had to deal with. The idea was simple. With a population exchange under the auspices of an international body, namely the League of Nations, the issue could be addressed within an international regulated legal framework. With the motivation of addressing the refugee issue, fulfilling their nationalist agendas, and avoiding future ethnic conflicts, the Greek and Turkish governments took an extraordinarily drastic step and ratified the convention concerning the exchange of populations on January 30, 1923. The 1923 population exchange was a diplomatic innovation in certain aspects. First, the policy of exchanging populations before the 1923 experience was on a voluntary basis, at least on paper. Secondly, previous population exchanges, whether realized or not, had been geographically delimited and only affected relatively small regions, usually at the borderland. The population transfer decided on at Lausanne was, on the other hand, all-encompassing regarding the geographical scope it covered, except for minor regional exceptions. The convention concerning the 1923 population exchange was retrospective to maximize the number of people subject to the convention and to avoid any return attempts. Finally, in these respects, the proposed exchange was seen as a model for the new international population management system. The Greco-Turkish exchange was supposed to be implemented under the auspices and with the assistance of international institutions, particularly the League of Nations. Religion was the sole basis for the exchange. It was the sole criteria. Rather than language or ethnicity, in other words, the Greek Orthodox Christians living in Turkey and the Muslims living in Greece would be subject to the exchange regardless of their language. So these linguistic minorities, Greek-speaking Turks, Muslims in Crete, or Turkish-speaking Greeks, Armenian-speaking Greeks were all subject to the exchange. As you can see, according to the 1928 census in Greece, more than 90% of the refugees were from the regions that we call today Turkey. Considering the fact that the total population of Greece was approximately 6.2 million, almost 20% of the total population was from Anatolia and Eastern Thrace. Refugees exhibited a great deal of diversity, including in their languages. As I stated a minute ago, the exchange was not founded on ethnicity or language, but on religion. So susceptible to the exchange were the linguistic minorities, including the Turkish-speaking Orthodox population. The Turkish-speaking refugees, together with others speaking different Greek dialects, which were as unintelligible as Turkish to the natives, faced a double challenge during their integration processes. There are numerous examples, but I will give only one example to illustrate this double challenge. In her testimony, a second-generation refugee born after her family's settlement in Mavrolopos, Ceres, Maricha Isayoglu Paskalidou, narrates her childhood in the 1930s as follows. The discrimination that she was subject to due to the language she spoke was her biggest complaint in life, according to her statement. We came to this village from Barla, a village in Sparta today. The first thing that I will tell you was our discontent. We, the children, did not know the language. Our grandfathers and our grandmothers talked to us in Turkish. We did not know even a single word. We were ashamed to go out of our village because they made fun of us. When we went to school and talked in Turkish, the teacher used to give us punishment. We did not know Greek, and we weren't talking. The teacher was asking us questions, and we weren't answering in order not to say something wrong. And once he heard us playing and speaking Turkish as if we were in a Turkish village. Then he told that whoever talks in Turkish will bring us an egg and an egg as a punishment. And the teacher collected baskets of eggs. We did so. What else could we do? We couldn't speak Greek and we couldn't communicate in Greek. Anyways, there was a kid from Old Greece, and this Paleoeladitis, the inhabitant of Old Greece, was called Thanasis. And he was very mean. He used to call us Turcophone. Whenever they call us Turcophone, we revolted. Even we quit going to school because of that. There was another classmate who spoke Turkish all the time. They could not forbid him to speak Turkish. We weren't speaking, we didn't know that word when we didn't know that word. We weren't speaking because we were afraid of telling our mom every day, give me an egg. And that kid, what did he do? One day he brought a chicken and gave it to the teacher and told him, feed the chicken and take the eggs, because I cannot speak Greek and I don't want to get a thrashing from my mom every day for asking for eggs. So a tragicomic testimony. And you can hear very similar stories from Muslim Cretans resettled in Turkey after the population exchange, or from their descendants. And Marica Isayoglu Pascalidou was one of many Turkish-speaking refugees in Greece. The 1928 census gives us some statistical information about the Turcophone refugees. According to the census, 191,000 Turkish-speaking people were living in Greece, and more than half of them were refugees. The regional distribution of the Turkish-speaking refugees as follows, but for the sake of time, I cannot discuss right now anything about the distribution of the Turkish-speaking population, but as you can see, the majority of them is in the Greek Macedonia region. Okay, after this preliminary facts and figures, let's get to the main topic of this talk. So the Turkish-speaking refugees, they constituted almost 5% of the total population in Greece. So being deprived of access to the existing social and political networks, the refugees utilize different means to participate in the social life of their new homeland, in quote unquote, of course, homeland, to participate in politics to defend their interests and rights, and most importantly, to banish the aphonia imposed upon them. One of the means that the refugees used was newspapers. This talk will focus on the Turcophone refugees and the refugee press that emerged in Greece after the Asia Minor catastrophe and the population exchange. My goal is to elaborate on the adaptation process of the refugees through the lenses of one of these newspapers, namely Προσφυγική Φωνή. Refugees actively took steps to integrate themselves into mainstream society by organizing associations, commissions, and centers such as Επιτροπή Ποντιακών Μελετών and Enosis Zimmerneon. And in addition to these larger organizations, they founded hundreds of local ones. The refugees' enthusiasm for establishing self-organizations took the form of an absolute frenzy. In 1927, Prosvigos Kosmos, another refugee organization, criticized the fragmentation of the refugee organizations and their ever-increasing number by calling it political mania. According to the same newspaper, 4,104 refugee organizations operated throughout Greece in that year. Different forms of organizations were not the only means the refugees utilized to integrate themselves into Greek society. As Elliot Mears observes and vividly describes, in Greece, newspapers had a crucial place in the daily routine of the early 20th century urban life. Some upper middle class refugees seem to be well aware of or quickly realize this fact. That is how, immediately after their arrival, a new press genre was born in Greece, namely the refugee newspapers. Particularly during the first decade of the post-disaster era, numerous refugee newspapers and periodicals began to circulate nationwide in an effort to make their voices heard via this semi-public medium. Prosphiki, Ephemeriston Prosphigon, Mikrasitiki, Ephemeristis Anatolis, Prosphiki Phoni, Prosphikos Agon, Prosphikos Kosmos, Poada, Prosphiki Enosis, and Prosphikos Phos were among the newspapers published by refugees in the first decade of the interwar period. So you can see the front pages of some of these newspapers, refugee newspapers here. And these are the prominent figures of the refugee press. Here you can see Hariton Polatoglu, most importantly, Makarios Sinanidis and Socrates Sinanidis. We're going to talk about them at length in a minute. Along with these newspapers and numerous local ones, there were also some scholarly periodicals published by the refugees, such as Trakika, Archeon Pondu, Mikrasetika Hronika, Mikrasetika Estia, and Pondiaki Estia. Let's zoom in one of these newspapers. So this is our main topic. Προσφυγική Φωνή was founded by Hariton Polatoglu in 1924. We do not know when the publication of Προσφυγική Φωνή ceased exactly. Although current bibliographic works on the Karamanlidika publications indicate that the newspaper was only published for 2 years till 1926, this was not the case. According to my findings, the newspaper lived for more than 10 years. First of all, the National Library of Greece has copies of the issues published in 1927. In addition to this, according to a letter sent by Polatoglu to Venizelos, we'll see this letter later on, the newspaper was in circulation in 1933. According to Haris Sabuncakis, a senior local historian who specializes in the history of Neo-Ionia, the newspaper ceased to exist in 1934. Sabuncakis shares the front page of an issue of the newspaper published in 1934 before the local election in Neo-Ionia, in which Polatoglu ran for mayor. He was not elected. Up until 2 weeks ago, I assumed that Προσφυγική Φωνή had halted publication due to this defeat and despair. Yet 2 weeks ago, I attended a conference in Thessaloniki. Right before going there, I realized that the Kozani Public Library listed Προσφυγική Φωνή in its historical newspaper collection. So I had an extra day in Thessaloniki. That day, I traveled to Kozani, 125 kilometers after a 20-hour flight. And the library only had one issue of the newspaper, which you can see here. This was a 2-page issue dated January 12, 1936. As you can see, it was announced that due to a printing house problem, the newspaper would only have 2 pages for a while. This issue was only in Greek, I think because of that problem. So we now have definitive confirmation that Polatoglu continued to publish the newspaper in 1936 after his electoral defeat in Neo-Ionia. So, who was Hariton Polatoglu? Polatoglu was an attorney. He was born in Konya in 1881. And I would say he was from Konya, actually, looking at his photograph, and became a refugee with the population exchange. According to Polatoglu's obituary published in the newspaper Embros, he was resettled in Neo-Ionia, a refugee settlement founded on the capital's northern outskirts. In October 1948, at the age of 68, he passed. He was active in a number of refugee organizations. In the first Anamnestikon Prosfikon Imerologion, commemorative refugee almanac, published in 1925, Polatoglu's name was listed among the board members of the Common Council of Elders of the province of Ikonia. Hariton Polatoglu, he was a proponent of liberalism, Venezuelism. He ran for the national parliament from liberal parties in the elections of 1926 and 1928. He was an MP in the early 1930s, and he ran for mayor of Nea Ionia, Athens, in the 1934 municipal elections, but he lost. Throughout his life in Greece, he appears to be a devoted and loyal supporter of Venizelos. And as I said, he died in Nea Ionia on October 17, 1948. Polatoglu's newspaper, Προσφυγική Φωνή, had a unique feature. It contained pages printed in Turkish with Greek characters, so-called Karamanlidika. The pages in Turkish with Greek characters were published under the title of Muhacir Sedası. The content of the Turkish pages with Greek letters was not a literal translation of the pages in Greek. The Karamanlidika pages were considerably more vibrant than the Greek pages. In the Karamanlidika pages, a serialized novel, the first Karamanlidika novel actually published in the Ottoman Empire, was republished in this newspaper, Temaşa-i Dünya ve Cefakâr-ı Cefakeş of Evangelinos Misailidis, and poems in Karamanlidika were published in addition to the news and commentaries. Polatoglu characterizes his newspaper as follows in a letter to Eleftherios Venizelos, dated May 1st, 1933. As you know, Mr. President, my newspaper is printed in two languages, Greek and Turkish with Greek letters, which is the only one of its kind. I made it famous among the Turcophone refugees, of whom there are known to be thousands, and this newspaper has become their only guide and only comrade. The newspaper, as Polatoglu remarked, was unique. Although we do not have circulation data for Προσφυγική Φωνή, Polatoglu informed Venizelos that thousands of copies were being sold in Athens, Piraeus, Macedonia, and the district of Kozani. Regarding the domain of circulation, what Polatoglu claimed appears to be accurate because despite being published in Athens, the newspaper received letters from refugees in Thessaloniki, Ceres, and Kozani, refugees resettled on different Greek islands, or even from Constantinople. In the new copy I discovered in Kozani, the nameplate reads "Η Προσφυγική Φωνή έχει την μεγαλύτεραν κυκλοφορίαν ανά τους συνοικισμούς Μακεδονίαν και Θράκην." Προσφυγική Φωνή has the largest circulation in the refugee settlements, Macedonia and Thrace. Moreover, the cost of a subscription to the publication from the United States was indicated in dollars. There, $7.5 for 100 issues on the second page. Προσφυγική Φωνή was eye-catching not only for the Turkish-speaking refugees, but also for a broader circle of people who wrote about the refugee issue, which dominated the political realm of the time. Shortly after its initial publication, the Turkish pages of the newspaper became contentious, prompting criticism and polemics. This was somewhat foreseeable when Turkish-speaking refugees were accused of being Turks and anti-Turkish emotions were high. What was unexpected was that the first stone was thrown by the liberal, ostensibly pro-refugee Venizelos faction. On June 1st, 1925, a reader's letter published in Eleftheron Vima sparked the first polemic. The headline of the brief letter was "A Greek Newspaper," and it was signed by Gangaris. Obviously, this was a pen name formed from the Greek word gangaros, which is exclusively used inside the phrase gangaros Atheneos, genuine Athenian, the author of the letter expressed his dissatisfaction with the Turkish-speaking refugees all over Athens, claiming that despite the fact that practically all refugees knew Greek better than the indigenous population, they chose Turkish over Greek. He also emphasized that a weekly newspaper, nicely titled Muhacir Sedası Προσφυγική Φωνή, has been published since last year. Gangaris finally asked in a provocative way why they used Greek letters while writing Turkish unless they were terrified of using Turkish directly. On July 4th, the response of Προσφυγική Φωνή to Eleftheron Vima was published as an editorial signed by Polatoglu, the director. On the Greek front page, Polatoglu criticized the letter in his piece, beginning with its title, labeling it rotten, ipoton siptikon titlon. Polatoglu responded to Gangaris' skepticism about the Hellenic character of his newspaper, claiming that even in Constantinople, the greatest capital of Hellenism, there used to be such Turcophone newspapers such as Anatoli or Asia, and that he was motivated by patriotic ideals in publishing such a newspaper, believing that the world of Asia Minor, Mikrasetikos Cosmos, should not indulge in darkness, but rather get enlightened with the publication of a Turkish-speaking newspaper informing the refugees on the general situation and more specifically, refugee-related issues. A scathing letter signed by the refugees from Cappadocia was published just below Polatoglu's editorial, condemning publicly the letter written by an unknown Mr. Gangaris, who regards such a serious issue in a very light-hearted manner. The author stated that as Anatolians, they recognize the need for publications addressing all classes for homogeneous societal development and progress. They too referred to the Daily Anatoly, which had been published for 60 years in Constantinople, they underlined, as a proof of the validity of their thesis. In quote, the refugees from Cappadocia also pointed out that Προσφυγική Φωνή was bilingual, and they ironically asked, in quote, if this Mr. Gangaris is as ignorant as the refugee world and cannot read the news in Greek pages of the newspaper, unquote. And they concluded the letter with a Homeric verse, as you can see, in ancient Greek. I'll keep you in mind along with the rest of the song. Shortly after the response of Προσφυγική Φωνή on July 15th, Eleftheron Vima released a more extensive piece titled The Language of Karamanlides, signed by N.M. Numu. Given the article's tone, it is reasonable to conclude that it was a defamation attempt. Similar to the first letter, the author of the article, who obviously knew Turkish, opened the discussion with his observations about the streets of Athens and Piraeus, where hearing people spoke Turkish was not uncommon. And to the author's surprise, there was even a newspaper published in Athens in Turkish with Greek letters under the Greek title Προσφυγική Φωνή. After telling the reader about the polemic's history, Numu began to fuel counter-arguments to Polatoglu's rejoinder. To start with, Numu claimed that, contrary to Polatoglu's claims, he could not find any article in the Karamanlidika press circulating in Constantinople, in the newspapers Anatolia and Asia, he meant, that corroborated the patriotic ideals of Cappadocians and, parallel to the very first letter, asserted that the Greeks from Cappadocia living in Constantinople had preferred Turkish to Greek without any excuse. When Προσφυγική Φωνή was considered, this was the situation as well. Numu attempted to undermine the validity of their Greekness by abusively addressing the other side of the debate as efendiler, the Turkish word for gentlemen. The article also critiqued the language of Προσφυγική Φωνή. For him, the language of the newspaper was an overcomplicated Turkish that the ignorant refugees, in quote, couldn't understand. Furthermore, the publication bastardized the Greek language by utilizing Greek nouns with Turkish suffixes, such as sinikizmoslar, plural, or sinikizmosunda, locative. Finally, Numu requested that the Προσφυγική Φωνή editorial board should halt printing the newspaper in this non-existent language, istin anipakton aftin glossan. According to Numu, while there is press freedom in Greece and newspapers published in all kinds of languages, none of these languages were non-existent, like Karamanlidika. The Karamanli language with Greek characters, he says, was a creation of the Bible societies and it serves no purpose in Greece. On June 18th, Προσφυγική Φωνή re-entered the fray with a lead article in Greek titled Once and for All. After recounting the background of the dispute, Προσφυγική Φωνή launched a heated attack on Numu, declaring, "We are not prepared to answer Numu's insults because neither does the tradition of Προσφυγική Φωνή allow us, nor, since we were not raised in the famous dives of Istanbul, do we know the language of them, which Numu admires that much." Then Προσφυγική Φωνή asserted that Numu is unaware of the ethnic services offered by the Turcophone Greek newspapers in the history of Hellenism in Anatolia. Following an explanation of the significance of the Turcophone Greek publications in Constantinople and in Anatolia, the article returned to the significance of these publications for the Turcophone refugees in Greece, whose existence was a reality. The newspaper described the refugee influx to Greece with a historical narrative based on the centuries of captivity of Anatolian Greeks until the repressive Turkish yoke. According to Προσφυγική Φωνή, whereas the young people spoke Greek well, the majority of the Turkish-speaking refugees had not had the opportunity to acquire this language. And the existence of the newspaper became meaningful at this point as a national duty to enlighten the unfortunate refugees about significant national problems. On September 13th, 1927, again, with the same abbreviated signature, Numu, the same author published another article in Eleftheron Vima titled Ekturkismos, on the phenomenon of the Turkification of the Greek language, where he offers the purification of the language by simply removing words originating from Turkish. In this article, he opens the discussion with the subject of Karamanlides and their language by referring to them as if they had been infected by a disease that had not been able to get cured until then, and without mentioning the name of Προσφυγική Φωνή, he points at a newspaper still getting published in Athens in Turkish with Greek characters. Unfortunately, we do not know if Προσφυγική Φωνή or how Προσφυγική Φωνή responded to the second wave of attacks by Numu, since the issues published after later than 1927 are not available in any of the collections. Although his identity was not divulged during these debates, these polemics, I discovered that Numu stood for Nikiforos Moschopoulos, who was of Constantinopolitan descent and had a very good command of Turkish. Moschopoulos later became the director of press at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in April 1930, a position he held for many years. Moschopoulos was a contributor to Eleftheron Vima during the time of this debate and contributed op-ed pieces, notably on anything happening in Turkey. Moschopoulos wrote many works in French and Greek on various historical topics, primarily the Ottoman Empire and Turkey. So I couldn't find any of his photographs in any Greek newspaper or in any Greek source, but I found this photograph in a Turkish newspaper because in the 1930s, he was writing Turkish articles to the Turkish newspapers while he was criticizing the Greek refugees. A few months after the first polemic between Eleftheron Vima and Προσφυγική Φωνή, the language problem arose again. On August 4th, 1925, another Athenian newspaper, Ethnos, another Venizelist newspaper, published a vignette called Let's Speak Greek. The author yet again expressed his uneasiness with the refugees speaking Turkish on the streets of Athens. Like the former articles and letters, this article also exhibits the situation as an arbitrary choice of the refugees. According to the author, the refugees insisted on speaking this foreign language instead of Greek, although their mother tongue was not Turkish. Now that the Albanian-speaking population learned and spoke Greek, and even in the villages around Athens, villagers speak simplified Katerebusa, the Turkish-speaking refugees had to start using Greek in their daily lives. This was also important for the education of their children. For this reason, the refugees needed to speak Greek at home as well, and it was necessary to introduce the refugee children to the language on a regular and early basis. The principal answer to this question, however, was the establishment of public kindergartens to teach the children Greek. Ethnos also underscored the critical nature of the swift assimilation of the Turcophone refugees in terms of ensuring national security and ethnic uniformity. The newspaper particularly emphasized their concentration in Macedonia. They thought that it was dangerous to have Turkish-speaking people resettled in Macedonia. Although its name was not explicitly cited by Ethnos, 2 days later on August 6, Προσφυγική Φωνή, as a representative of the Turkish-speaking refugees, gave an answer to Ethnos, this time from its Karamanlidika pages, with an article titled, "Yes, we should speak Greek, but evet, Rumca konuşmalıyız, fakat." The newspaper underlined the fact that for the Turcophone refugees, speaking Turkish was not a matter of choice, nor was it an indication of inferiority in terms of their Greek identity, but a situation conditioned by the history of the Rums living in Anatolia, which was apparently not known to Ethnos. According to Προσφυγική Φωνή, those who had no idea about the history and the living conditions in Anatolia under the 6 centuries-long Turkish yoke ought not to have written on such matters. All the refugees could learn and speak Greek, according to Προσφυγική Φωνή, when the state established excellent night schools for them. So these polemics must be examined from 3 perspectives. To begin with, the idiosyncrasy of the Turkish-speaking refugees' identity, which combines 2 discordant elements from a nationalist point of view, the Turkish language and the Orthodox Christianity, and constitutes an unstable unity from the standpoint of nationalism. This identity did not gain recognition and raised eyebrows in their new homeland. The Turcophone refugees, it might be said, fell outside of the margins of the nationalist framework into which the Greek nation state attempted to compress the entire post-World War I social structure. It's logical to conclude that such a response, or more precisely, a form of semio-violence, increased their marginalization, insecurity, and lingering sense of loss. On August 2nd, 1925, just before the second polemic, Προσφυγική Φωνή published an article titled, "They Became Infidel in Turkey, Refugee in Greece, Türkiye'de gavur, Yunanistan'da muhacir oldu," in which it was stated, "We ask and plead, please do not make us say, better the devil you know than the devil you don't." This innocent group of people that was labeled infidel for generations now resides here under the stigmatized designation of refugee. The native Greeks despise refugees in the same way that Turks despise infidels. We can argue that after their exodus, the Turcophone Rums' self-conscience took on a new form, with refugiehood, muhacirlik, taking center stage. Refugiehood linked their past to their present in the domain of the object, and vice versa. In other words, their origin and loss of home to their subaltern status in Greece. This has conditioned their very existence for decades. Although its content and social meaning have evolved through time, some of the major characteristics of their identity are refugiehood, uprootedness, and the marginalization that their progenitors endured in Greece, these are still their characteristics to a certain extent. And one can rightfully claim that the last link in the Turcophone room's chain of self-designation became Anatolian refugees, Anadolu'dan gelen muhacirler, as frequently used in Prosviki Foni. Second, it can be deduced from the discourse of Prosviki Foni throughout these polemics that in order to work through channels, the norms of the Greek nation state were widely accepted by the organic intellectuals of the Turkish-speaking refugee community, and their identity was also presented as a sort of historical defect or an ephemeral situation. Under these circumstances, while defending its very existence, Prosviki Foni as a Turcophone newspaper portrayed itself as a temporary agent in charge of a national assignment, which was to incorporate Turkish-speaking refugees into the existing nationalist structure. Taking on such a goal and legitimizing his publishing activities, Polatoglu emphasized the significance of enlightening Anatolian refugees through such soft means as a newspaper and a reform program that the state would implement. This discourse, with a special focus on the civilizing mission of Prosviki Foni, clearly parallels the discourse of the earlier Karamanlı publications in Istanbul, but differs from it in terms of its entirely secularized content. In other words, the publications in Karamanlı'da previously justified their existence by referencing the incomprehensibility of religious texts and rituals among the Turcophone Orthodox population and the coexistence of various denominational groups within the Ottoman Empire. Polatoglu, now that coexistence was no longer an option, put the emphasis on the refugees' complete understanding of daily national and refugee-related developments and framed this as a civilizing mission. Moreover, it is quite interesting to observe that the names of Anatoly and Asiya, two Karamanlı'da newspapers published in Constantinople in the Ottoman Empire, popped up during these polemics. This shows that these newspapers had an important place in the collective memory of the Turcophone population and for their identity. The names of these newspapers were frequently cited in the oral testimonies deposited in the Center for Asia Minor Studies in Athens as well. An additional noteworthy indication of the significance of the name Anatoly for the collective memory and identity of the Turcophone Orthodox population can be followed through the publication of the newspaper called Nea Anatoly in Karamanlı'da, first in Istanbul by Limnidis, and then through Violakis and Polatoglu's attempts to revive it in Athens in 1924, and the publication of a new newspaper called Anatoly by Limnidis again in 1926 and in 1929 in Thessaloniki. It can be said that in addition to the relics of their home that they brought during their exodus, the Anatolian refugees also brought the idea of a Turcophone newspaper that inherited the tradition created in Constantinople, and through which they could communicate in their mother language. By this means, the Turcophone refugees tried to revive and reclaim their past and replicate it in an environment where their hopes of return were shattered. Polatoglu's correspondence sent to Venizelos expressly stated that the newspaper had been devised as a medium to cater to the requirements of the Liberal Party associated with Venizelos. Based on the writings of Prosviki Foni, it can be deduced that Polatoglu regarded political engagement as a significant means of safeguarding the rights of the refugees and mitigating their sense of estrangement. The aforementioned phenomenon is most prominently exemplified in the electoral campaign conducted by the Prosviki Foni party during the referendum pertaining to Greece's transition into republic, which took place on April 13, 1924. Greece was in turmoil after the Asia Minor disaster. The political schism intensified between liberals, Venizelos, and royalists. So did the political instability of the country. In September 1922, a military coup under the leadership of Nicolaus Plastiras deposed the anti-Venizelos royalist regime, and under the pressure of the coup, King Constantine I abdicated in favor of his son, George II, and was forced to flee the country. Another immediate action of the coup was to call upon Eleftherios Venizelos, who had been exiled, to lead the negotiations at Lausanne, where the unredeemed Greeks would be saved, not by means of irredentism, but this time by means of diplomacy. Meanwhile, anti-Venizelist officers and politicians were held responsible for the Asia Minor catastrophe and put on trial for treason. The trial resulted in the execution of 6 anti-Venizelist officers in November 1922. Such a trial and Venizelist restoration was necessary to diffuse popular unrest among the incoming refugees. Together with the triumph of Venizelism, republicanism also gained considerable traction. Finally, the Second Hellenic Republic was proclaimed on March 25, 1924, by the parliament and was ratified by a referendum held on April 13, 1924, which resulted in the abolition of the crown for 11 years until the return of King George II to the country with the anti-Venizelist, anti-republican military coup in 1935. The trial of the 6 and the proclamation of the Republic were the first 2 momentous historical events that proved the importance of the refugee support vote in polarized interwar Greek politics. The rise of republicanism in the 1920s can be attributed in part to the substantial backing of Venizelism by the Asia Minor immigrants, among other contributing factors. The scholars who have written on this particular time period emphasize the critical role played by refugee support in the establishment of the Second Republic. The significance of the fanatic support exhibited by the refugee masses toward the Republic was articulated by Alexandros Papanastasiou, the incumbent prime minister at the period of the referendum. There were several causes behind this support. The Asia Minor refugees attributed the catastrophe as well as their subsequent displacement to the king and anti-Venizelism. Another reason was the opportunity that the Venizelist sociopolitical web offered to the refugees as the only available means of integration. The animosity toward refugees within the native Greek community, along with the endorsement of such sentiment by the anti-Venizelist political establishment, can be identified as additional contributing elements. The influence of Venizelos' charismatic leadership, which had been a central focus of Greek politics for a significant period of time, was an undeniable component as well. In addition to the aforementioned reasons, supported by evidence from Προσφυγική Φωνή, it may be argued that the refugees harbored opposition not just towards the Greek monarchy, but also towards the institution or the idea of monarchy, given their previous status as subjects of the Ottoman Sultan. Consequently, their sentiments aligned with republican ideals. According to Mihail Kirkos, a member of parliament who himself was a refugee, the refugees' strong attachment to the concept of a republic could be attributed to its deep connection with their ancestral homes, familial legacies, and sacred values. And of course, monarchy was synonymous with all that was evil and cruel. Προσφυγική Φωνή began publishing propaganda, news, and stories regarding the establishment of the Second Republic in its very first issues. However, Karamanlidika publications began at the end of March with an anonymous article titled Republic, Cumhuriyet. The article describes the difference between these 2 types of governance in a linear progression from monarchy to republic in practically academic terminology. This article emphasizes that the refugees' hostility was not simply against the monarchy in Greece, but it was categorical. The following are the excerpts from the article. The abuses of the kings, their reactionary posture, and their inability began to awaken the peoples. And instead of tolerating a dynasty, the method of voting the most skilled as leader became popular among European peoples. Only during the Republican periods did both Greeks and Latins, means Romans, appear to make headway. Republic denotes towards motion, whereas kingdom denotes reversal. Everything a king does is based on sectarianism and religion. Republican leaders, on the other hand, act in response to public needs. On April 9th, in another unsigned article titled Muhacir Meseleleri, Refugee Issues, Selametimiz, Our Salvation, Προσφυγική Φωνή warns its leaders about monarch betrayals and emphasizes the political message that the proclamation of the Republic and its ratification by the people was a prerequisite for the salvation of the refugees and the entire nation that paid for the king's mistakes. As a result, the majority of refugees should have voted in favor of the Republic in the referendum. This piece is pretty noteworthy in terms of Προσφυγική Φωνή's word choice and how it refers to the monarchy. The newspaper prefers to use the phrase kings and sultans over and over again throughout the article, which I believe supports the argument that Προσφυγική Φωνή tries to equate the Greek king to the Ottoman sultan and uses history to resurrect the refugees' bitter pre-disaster memories and unite them against the Greek king via their anti-Turkish Ottoman sentiments. And it's also worth noting that in the same edition of the newspaper, there's a short bit of news about the Communist Party's support for the Republic. This was one of the few pieces of positive information regarding the communists. On the bottom of the pages of this issue, there were slogans that read, Muhacirler, Cumhuriyete rey veriniz, refugees, vote in favor of the Republic. Selametiniz Cumhuriyet'in bekasıdır. Your salvation is the Republic's permanence. The next three issues of Προσφυγική Φωνή, issues 10, 11, and 12, focus almost entirely on the referendum topic, and their front and back pages were designed to seem like pamphlets with headings larger than the standard of the newspaper. The title of the leading article in issue 11 was composed of a sequence of slogans. Refugees, for obtaining the refugee loan, for the happiness of entire Greek society, for ensuring the security of Europe, for maintaining peace and order in country. All of you, vote in favor of the Republic. Long live the Republic, down with the criminal kingdom. Notably, the article concludes with slogans composed of Turkish and Greek words. Yaşasın demokratiya. Ne? Kahrolsun Vasiliya. Long live the Republic, yes, down with the monarchy. By doing so, the newspaper is, in my opinion, attempting to educate the refugees on the political jargon associated with the referendum process. The content of the article is also quite interesting. After describing the desperate situation in which refugees had lived in the Ottoman Empire and were then living in Greece, the author says, waiting for any help from the anthropomorphous creatures of Greece, Yunanistan'ın insana benzeyenlerinden, for the improvement of our living conditions is stupidity. And continues, those who made us refugees, who separated us from our 3,000-year-old homelands, who separated us from the graves of our beloved ones and turned our sanctuaries into barns, who devastated 2.5 million people and made half of them perish in the hands of the Turks, were not the Turks. Instead of the Turks, the author blames King Constantine, his bloodthirsty dynasty and the parties that backed him. In this article, Προσφυγική Φωνή clears Venizelos' name of responsibility for the Asia Minor disaster. Finally, the newspaper presents Greece's schism as a polarization between honorable and patriotic citizens and corrupt ones. So, the day before the referendum, the final Turkish page of the newspaper features slogans as page headings, as well as an article on the significance of the referendum titled Muhacir Hakim olalım. Let us take charge of our own fate. And you can see the slogans here, and they use the word padişahlık, the sultanate, instead of kingdom or monarchy. The Sultanate, it eradicated our existence entirely. The Sultanate, it threw our children and siblings into the sea. The Sultanate, it removed us from our homes. The Sultanate, it abandoned us on streets, starved and desperate. The sole remedy for this, it is the Republic. Those with a conscience and a desire to safeguard their integrity, life, and property will vote for the Republic. It's pointless to cry over spilled milk. Let us take charge of our own fate. So I would like to underline again the frequent usage of the term Sultanate to describe the monarchy. This article also discusses the concept of the Republic as a progressive form of governance and highlights the contrasting characteristics between a government based on popular consent and one led by a monarch. And it says the following: whatever happened to us happened, and today we fell into the real motherland's arms. Protecting these arms is only possible if we can take control of our own fate. The monarchical nightmare should be ended. Following the ratification of the Republic with an impressive majority of 70%, the newspaper modestly celebrated the significant milestone and emphasized the aspirations of the refugee community after their unwavering backing. In summary, Προσφυγική Φωνή provided considerable support to the Republican Front and to Venezuelism. As discussed here, Polatoglu saw the newspaper as a means of enlightenment among the Turkish-speaking refugees. In the context of the proclamation of the Republic in 1924, the newspaper fulfilled this responsibility by producing specialized propaganda materials for the Turcophone refugees and by providing historical and political explanations of the Republic's significance and the necessity of such a form of government in Greece. It was interesting to observe Προσφυγική Φωνής categorical rejection of monarchy as a system of governance, its equation of the kingdom to the Sultanate, and its strategic employment of the term padişahlık to mobilize the refugees' recollection of the Ottoman past against the Greek kingdom. The anti-Venezuelist press quickly turned their attention to the political posture of Polatoglu and his newspaper subsequent to this campaign. In October 1924, the protagonist of anti-Venezuelism among newspapers, Scrip, published a series of articles addressing the refugee crisis. The serialized articles bore the subtitle, "Refugees, Hear the Voice of the Truth," suggesting that refugee voice, Προσφυγική Φωνή, did not accurately reflect the voice of the truth. The newspaper's influence and the controversy surrounding it persisted throughout the 1930s. The controversial and influential nature of Προσφυγική Φωνή was such that on December 12, 1930, the Daily Macedonia reported the publication of a fake Προσφυγική Φωνή in Thessaloniki aimed at endorsing a refugee candidate in the elections. Even though hitherto neglected, the last long-lived Karamanlı newspaper was Προσφυγική Φωνή, which was published in Athens and circulated for more than a decade between 1924 and probably 1936. After Προσφυγική Φωνή ceased to publish, Karamanlidika was never used again in the sphere of politics to this extent. The newspaper gained a seat in the history of the press and the interwar puzzle of Greece. It became influential among the refugees across the country and aroused controversy in the deeply divided Greek politics and society. So while studying the history of the population exchange and the refugee issue, one of my major scholarly concerns is to make the voice of the refugees audible. That is why I would like to finish this presentation with a poem written by a Turcophone refugee and published in Προσφυγική Φωνή. I'll read the original poem in Turkish, so you can hear the poetic rhythm and cadence. You can read the translation here, and the poem is the following. Ey muhacir, durma ağla, imdat yoktur kimseden. Türkiye'den biz kovulduk, hiç kabahat itmeden. Yurdumuzdan Yunan deyu, Türkler bizi kovdular. Buradakiler Türk'ten beter, cümlemizi üzdüler. Hem boğdular, hem soydular, çok perişan ettiler. Canımızı ovalara, aç, meskansız attılar. So, thank you.
Thank you so much.
So,
Storage, and I personally have a bunch of questions, but I would like to open it up to our audience. So, one question.
If you can use that poem, in
yeah.
English.
Sure. Yeah.
Since the basis of the exchange was religion, the newspaper doesn't even talk much about the religious hierarchy and what role that might have played in defending. Weren't there Greek-speaking priests who might have intervened?
Yeah, the content of the newspaper, as I told, was secular actually, but in order to underline their Greek character, Hellenic nature of this community, they occasionally refer to their Orthodox religion, Orthodox Christianity. They occasionally underline that we are a part of the same community, as the same religious community with you, and we shared the same religious values, traditions, etc. Or they even claim that they preserved it under harsher conditions in comparison with the other part of the Hellenic community scattered, Greece. And they say that they lost their language skills, they lost their linguistic identity, but they somehow preserved their religious identity. By doing so, they preserved their Hellenic identity as well. So that was, here and there, you can come across this explanation when they defend themselves.
But a quick follow-up, do I take it then that the religious hierarchy is actually monarchist?
Yes. They supported the monarchy because they were the part of the status quo, actually. And they also supported the Asia Minor campaign, which resulted in the catastrophe. So they were also somehow held responsible for the disaster in 1922, but they tried to keep a low profile after the disaster. And in the second half of the 1920s, we saw that church became more and more active in the refugee settlement and in the integration of the refugee is into the existing Greek society. In the first years after the catastrophe, the church they kept a low profile as far as I can see. Yeah.
This is the Turcophone religious hierarchy.
There was not a separate Turcophone religious hierarchy.
Well, the religious hierarchy that came with the refugee population.
Yeah.
They're all of one mind with the Greece.
I have no information about that actually. They were the part of the same, ecclesiastical organization. So I suppose that they were more or less on the same page with the church as well.
And actually, I wonder, this is a detail, but would they have fallen under the jurisdiction of the patriarchate as opposed to the Archbishopric in Athens? So I wonder whether the marching orders come from Istanbul rather than Athens. So that's, I have no idea, I have no way to answer this.
Yeah, although there was a tension between Athens and Constantinople during the population exchange process and the resettlement and the transfer of the population, they were more or less in cooperation with each other.
Thank you for really exciting research. And I think you're going to have another presentation next Thursday.
Yeah, yes.
I have a couple of questions, but I'm going to ask one. The others I'm still trying to formulate. You mentioned that the refugees were pro-Republican. It was very interesting that they were using padişah, referring to did you come across any articles or any views about the new republic in Turkey, like how they were perceiving what was happening in Turkey? Because otherwise would be the one who.
Yeah, exactly. Mustafa Kemal was the arch enemy of the refugee population in the newspaper. He was presented like that, but they followed the developments in Turkey because they had the hope until 1930, hope of return to their homeland. So they were closely watching what was happening in Turkey. But it's quite interesting because they keep making fun of Turkey's, Republican transformations and the so-called revolutionary process in Turkey. They made fun of this because they didn't believe that this was something natural for the Turks to, adopt a sort of progressive and quote-unquote revolutionary stance after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. They were hoping that somehow the Ottoman Empire would continue, but it didn't. And then really there are some really funny pieces in the newspaper. And there is also a poem as well. I wish, it's not with me, but later on I can share it with you. Yes.
Really interesting talk. Thanks for coming. Are these newspapers the only place where you found Turkish written in Greek letters, or was there any other sort of written culture at the time?
In Turcophone publications, you mean? Yeah.
Books in Turkish letters or anything, or was it just newspapers?
In Greece, yes. A couple of books were published after the population exchange and after the, unmixing of the populations until 1930s. But immediately after, particularly after Metaxas in 1936, the printing culture in Karamanlidika, let's say, it disappeared. But there were some books, but it was, as I told, Karamanlidika, Turcophone publications was an Istanbul-centric phenomenon, and it was developed in the late 19th century, basically, and it was the heyday of this tradition, late 19th century, second half of the 19th century, let's say. But it continued in Greece as well, but disappeared slowly but surely.
Clarification question. So was there actually an effort to teach adult refugees Greek, or was it just expected that on their own they would?
Yeah, there were night schools, etc. in the neighborhoods, refugee neighborhoods. Night schools were established, and it was simply forbidden to use Turkish language in the public sphere in the second half of the 1930s. So, especially the male population, they had to learn Greek, so there were some means and places to do that.
So, a number of questions. First that comes up, is there ever in Turkey, when you gave a hint, but also outside it, a communist lefty Turcophone voice. Because we have a sense of the refugee population in Greece being overrepresented when it comes to the Communist Party's electoral power. Do we see evidence of that in these newspapers, or do the lefty-leaning Turcophone refugees go with the rest of the refugees in the Communist Party and they find their expression there?
There is a refugee newspaper published not by, but in line with the Communist Party of Greece, Προσφυγικός Αγών, but it is in Greek. But some in the 1940s, some leaflets were published in Karamanlidika by the Communist Party. As far as I know, that is the only case. And I think during the Civil War as well, they published and distributed some Turcophone material during the Civil War, but not as a well-defined, newspaper, or they published, regular means to spread their, views among Turcophone refugees. Actually, I found an article in Rizzospastis a couple of months ago. I realized I came across that article.
The
Communist Party's newspaper, yeah, Rizzospastis. It means radical. And it says that, okay, these ignorant Turkish-speaking refugees keep, supporting Venezuelans, and since they are so ignorant that we cannot infiltrate into some sectors of the working class, that was the main concern of the article. So yeah, they were very critical about the Turkish-speaking refugees. But this is just one example.
And another, a bunch of questions, but we have here draft after we continue. You mentioned the 600-year yoke story. Is this a trope that ever appears in Turcophone Orthodox Greek populations before the expulsion and the exchange, or is it something that springs up in the motherland's nationalist narrative and gets adopted?
Only during the occupation periods. I mean, after the First World War, during the occupation of Istanbul and Izmir, a newspaper, a Karamanlidika newspaper, is published called Nea Anatoli, New East or New Anatolia. Only in that I came across this emphasis, and then in Greece it was imported to Greece. Yeah, it's something new because particularly Anatoly, the longest lived newspaper in the Ottoman Empire, Karamanlidika newspaper, Turcophone newspaper in the Ottoman Empire, it published more than 60 years. It's the longest living newspaper published in Turkish, actually, in the Ottoman Empire. It had an Ottomanist stance. So it supported Ottomanism. It was not nationalist, at least when Evangelos Misailidis was alive. When his children took over, it became slowly nationalist. You start come across some, nationalist articles or some implications in here and there in the newspaper, but mostly until 1914, until the First World War, they supported the Ottoman Empire. I mean, the integrity of the Ottoman Empire. They tried to continue their life within the framework that they were used to, let's say, yeah.
The Bible societies are Protestants?
Yes, Protestants, exactly, yeah. They somehow not invented, but industrialized Karamanlidika publication process as a part of their mission in Anatolia.
Which makes it fascinating that the attack comes from mainland Greeks.
Exactly.
Under the Orthodox archbishopric.
Yeah, first Patriarchate reacted to this crusade in Anatolia, and then the mainland Greece. Yeah.
The juggernaut of the Greek national narrative and state and night schools and
exactly.
Thing to follow, scary, but
like that. To what extent it was a top-down assimilation or Hellenization project, and what extent the Turcophone refugees could resist to that? Were there any concerns to preserve the language, preserve the Anatolian culture, or were they willing to cooperate? And what's the situation now? How is this transmitted through generations?
Yeah, of course, this depends on many factors, I think. If you are a well-established person within the society, you wanted immediate assimilation, immediate integration to the society. And if you're not, you might want to keep your identity, your roots, your heritage. And this happens so actually still in the fourth generation, fifth generation, they try to somehow leave their Anatolian, traditions. They have a yearly gathering, which is called Gavustima, which kavuşma meeting. Fifth generation refugees come together, Turkish-speaking refugees, even though they do not know Turkish anymore. They sing Turkish songs. They do local dances, Turkish or Anatolian folk dances, etc. So a night of Anatolia they experience. And right now there's a new, trend in Greece with the Turkish series, etc., television series. So a revival of Turkish language was also, is also actually something that we have to look at among these descendants of the refugees. Turcophone refugees. So,
and I wonder what happens with the post-coup Turkish citizens settling in Greece, and whether they end up mixing with these,
exactly.
these groups and helping with that.
Actually, today I saw a video about this, but I couldn't watch. It was on YouTube. But obviously, there's a sizable Turkish community right now after the coup, and from different political, alignments, coming from different political alignments. It's an interesting subject, how they interact with the old, Turkish-speaking community, if they interact with this community, etc. It's an interesting question,
Remembering the lost home.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Nostalgia. Yeah.
Well, we will continue with on this subject, or we can always deviate at Beercraft, or whoever wants to join for the social element of this conversation. I'd like to thank Aytek for a truly rich presentation. And before we leave today, I'd like to let you know that our next presentation will be next Friday, when we host Hiba Abdelgawad, research fellow with the Institute of Archaeology at the University College of London, who will be traveling to join us from Cairo. We look forward to welcoming her, and thanks everyone, both present in person here and online, for joining us today.
Thank you very much.